Specialist.io.
Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of You Deserve Fresh Lettuce. I am your co-host Rachel.
And I'm Delia.
And in this episode we're going to be talking about learned toxic behavior.
Yes.
Don't forget to follow us on social media at YDFL Podcast. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, you can also ask Alexa to play the show for you.
With Spotify.
Yeah.
And then don't forget to go on YouTube, subscribe, and
Yes,
listen.
like, comment, share, all the fun things.
Yes.
So let's get into it. Learned toxic behavior. Ooh, this is a touchy subject, let me tell you.
I think everyone has their own luggage and baggage from their childhood and upbringing based on what they saw, whether the parents fought, whether the parents got along. It's just so many variables to this, but everybody kind of carries a little bit of that with them.
And you might not even know, by the way.
No, you may not know that you're doing it.
So pull up your cup of tequila and
Your glass, your cup.
Get ready to hear some stuff. Okay, so I'll kind of go first.
Yes.
So my first year of marriage, this is where I first realized how powerful this kind of preconditioning that we have is.
Right.
When I got married, my first year,
Right.
I literally would do these little things, and they weren't little, it was kind of big things. And what I would do is, I would maybe feel some kind of way, like maybe I would feel like I maybe felt neglected, or maybe there was something that I would need, whether it was affection or attention or whatever it was that I needed. Instead of I now know, right? If you want hugs, give hugs. If you want compliments, give compliments. If you want to spend time, someone to spend time with you, schedule a lunch with them. Like, you got to be that which you hope to attract, right? And you got to put it into the world. You got to be the
initiator. You got to initiate those things.
Put it into the world, right? So I didn't know that, obviously, at 18 years old or whatever it was, I got married. And so what did I do? I would act bothered. I would act
you wanted him to be a mind reader.
I would act bothered, or I would just have these weird, I would kind of start fights. And what I would do is the opposite, the actions were the opposite of what I wanted. So I kind of like push him away.
Yeah.
When really all I wanted was
attention and love and affection
to come to me. Yeah.
And then he's like, I'm not going to get near her. She's being a total you know what. And I'm like going to push her away.
And to literally be, I'm 46 years old right now, to literally be an age where I look around, whether it's people in my family, whether it's whoever it is in the world, and I see them doing this. They actually
I know
want
what that looks like.
closeness. Even with me, for example, they'll be like, well, I just want to spend more time with you. You don't want to spend time with me. Yeah. And it's like, well, then say. You don't have to say, why don't you spend time with me? Just say, hey, why don't we do lunch on whatever day?
Right.
And to see the people literally go into silent treatments, cabinet slamming, having fits, acting indifferent, acting like they don't care and they don't want what you have to offer.
Right.
When it's the actual opposite.
And I think a lot of the time, it's the behavior that we see, like the way that our parents got along, the dynamic. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, let's just say your dad liked to drink a lot, and your mom like had a big issue with it.
Oh yeah.
So now, for whatever reason, you've now been conditioned to look at your husband if he's drinking and say, "Why are you doing that again?" And rather than being like, okay, all the things, so you're supposed to really think about all the things you didn't like about your parents and say, okay, how can I change those things and how can I make them better? So rather, I mean, if your husband drinks a lot and then he gets abusive, that's another show or another podcast. But my point is that if he's drinking, but he's just become social, let him drink. Let him do his thing.
Yeah.
If he doesn't want to drink, he doesn't have to. But I think a lot of the time, like if you saw that growing up with your parents where your mom had an issue with your dad drinking, now all of a sudden you're conditioned to look at your husband and say, that's a problem. And if your mom or your dad, if your mom was a nag, maybe try to not be a nag. And that's another thing that's a learned behavior in my opinion. So a lot of the time, rather than becoming what we don't like in our parents, we should become the opposite and really work hard to say, okay, these things I didn't like. I didn't like my parents speaking lack. You know, I
Right.
didn't like the fact that they were like, we don't have money for bills. We
You
don't have
think
money
money
for this.
grows on trees?
Yeah, you think money
Yeah.
grows on, you
Now
know.
we're like, money is everywhere.
And money's everywhere. I'm
Abundance.
abundant.
Yeah.
But that's learned behavior. And so when you grow up in a family where that is what you're being conditioned to learn, then you automatically take that to your relationship or to your long-term relationship, marriage, whatever, and you really need to think about what you didn't like about your, upbringing.
Yeah, for sure. Gut check your motives. When you find yourself feeling some kind of way,
Right.
resentment, indifference, whatever it might be that you're like, ugh,
I hate that.
take a moment before you open your mouth and spread these words, because remember, we say words and men make decisions
Yes,
quietly in their mind about those
absolutely.
words that you're saying, usually against us, these
Yes,
decisions.
yes.
So be very mindful of that, but just have a little moment with yourself and go, why is this such a trigger? And
Right.
you will then realize, well, maybe, yeah, like Delia said, my mom hated when my dad drank. So now if I even smell a little bit of beer on his breath, I have no choice but to kick up a bunch of dust over it. You know, if you're faithful, whatever, and you read your Bible, there's even something in the Bible that I remember I was so shocked when I came across it. And it was basically like, do not shame the one who is drunk with wine. And it basically alludes to, you can then later on have a conversation, but never do it in public, never shame them,
Right.
just let them
Do their thing.
And I was like, oh man, because I was guilty of what you described.
Right. No, and then also, in my opinion, I think that we as women, we have this negative stigma, because the negative stigma is that we are just nags.
Yes.
Period. You're never gonna hear a man be a nag, like, oh, he's a nag. No, it's always the women, and that is sometimes learned behavior. And that behavior also, by the way, isn't just from the parents. Sometimes it's learned behavior from your friends, from your girlfriends. When you sit down and you have a conversation with the girlfriends, and all of a sudden they're saying, oh, I let him know, like, you're not going to be talking to me like this, and F that, and I'm going to go spend this much money, and whatever it is that they're doing that's so negative, like getting in his face and almost wanting to fight physically with him, that could be something that, if you start getting in an altercation, you're like, well, I'm going to be like so-and-so and get in his face. And you should always think about the people that are around you, even if it wasn't when you were being brought up.
Yeah, that's true, because people leave an impression on you.
They always
and
do.
You just don't even, you don't even know. It's like a person that, cusses a lot, and then maybe you don't cuss, and now all of a sudden you're cussing more because they're doing it.
Yes.
And it's just human nature to do
you just
that.
pick up. Sometimes we pick up on the negative, negative little details and things from different people.
Yeah.
So I think that if you can really sit there and think about, okay, this person has an amazing marriage. Like, what is it? So for me, I would tell you, like, when someone's been married a long time, I don't necessarily say what's the secret. It could be that she's just put up with a lot.
Yeah,
it could be, and she just doesn't share it.
It could just be Xanax.
It could be anything. I just always want to know, like, what is the thing that keeps them kind of thriving and alive and in love, and those are the things that I always want to know.
It's funny you bring up the nagging thing, because there is a thing that I've seen, and I don't know, again, if it's cultural, but I've seen this thing within women that they feel like they have to put man bash. It's man bashing, and it's going to then, you're married to your husband, then you're going to your parents, and you're like, oh God, guess what he did this week? Or you're going to your best friend, and you're like, oh my God, I can't stand when he does this, he's at it again. And the energy and the narrative that you're building around your person, your significant other, is absolutely negative. Like, you are literally churning everyone against him. They may still be nice to him, but you're going around and you're literally creating this super sort of clouded view of who he is, yet you probably genuinely love him. And I think that's tough.
Or you know what too, if you say something negative, like let's just say today you say something completely negative about something that he did, the way he eats, the way he drives, what he said to you, how rude he was, and then come a week later, you're over it and you forgot you even mentioned that part, that negative part of it. But guess what? The people around you and the people around him are not going to forget the negative thing that you said. So now when they go to say hi to him, they might be like, or her, they might say like, "Hey, what's going on? What's up? Hey,"
And
they
then
might
roll
be a
their
little,
eyes in the background,
they may
like-
be a little indifferent towards it.
Yeah.
And I think that there's nothing better and greater than to keeping things to yourselves
Yep.
and protect it. To where if there's something negative, don't speak it out to everyone
Yeah.
else. Speak it to him.
It's kindergarten.
In a nice way, though.
If you have nothing to say, don't.
Nice to say, don't
yeah,
say
if
it
you
at
have
all.
nothing nice to say, don't say it
say
at
it
all.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I think that if we could just put us women, put ourselves in their shoes,
Right.
and imagine if every time they were with their buddies, they were talking about what a freaking like wretched freaking wench you were, and oh my god,
And it
I can't
happens
stand.
too.
And they do it,
Yeah.
but you know, imagine if it was a constant, because I can tell you, more often than not, women are just completely slandering their partners.
Yeah.
And I know, like, there's a generation before us that has the belief that you don't say good things about your husband to other women,
Right.
because then they're gonna want your man. So we're like in this constant weird limbo of
where
like,
everyone's like, yes, say this, no, don't say
Yeah.
that. I think you just have to stay neutral. How's he doing? He's doing amazing. How is this? It's great.
yeah,
How's that? Unless you really need to open up to someone that you know that is going to have limited or very limited judgment on your significant other and or you for
Yes.
being there. I think that at that point you need to then say, okay, how much can I say to this person and how much do I have to keep to myself? Because let me tell you something, you have to protect that energy because that is your partner.
Yep.
And the whole nagging thing, that's another thing. Like if you saw that growing up,
oh my
that's
god,
another thing. Like kind of going on a tangent, but going back to the nagging, like that's
or the
that's
yelling,
tough.
like, okay, so I know a few people that their actual tone, like the tone in the relationship, is to literally be yelling, and they're not necessarily mad, but everything is like, no, blah blah blah, like the yelling.
I told you to grab it.
Yeah,
grab it
and
from
then
the garage.
and then by the way, then it turns into like they're yelling at the husband, but then also then the kids are like, no, blah blah blah, mom, and then they're like, no, I told you, and then you're in the house, and even everybody's like freaking out because
Yeah.
that's just the tone, and the dude just is like, because it's
Tapped
like,
out.
imagine if your smoke alarm went off all the time, but then when there's actually a reason for it to go off,
Right.
it goes off, you're just not even gonna care. The house is
Yeah,
gonna
you're
burn
like,
down.
oh, it
Freaking
is
shit's
what
gonna
it
burn
is.
down.
Or let's just take the battery
Yeah,
out. She's
yeah,
crazy.
just yank it
She's
from the
just
wall.
crazy. Yeah,
Yeah.
she's crazy. Yeah, no, and I think that the whole toxic behavior also, it could be like if you saw your mom going through your dad's phone, if you saw your mom going through his car, if she was, going to see if he was where he said he was and he's not, like if she got crazy with someone because she thought he was having an affair with them. I mean, I've heard the stories. I am grateful that I never saw it, but I've heard the stories. And sometimes that is learned behavior.
Yep.
And you have to really think about whether or not that is something that you want to bring to the table. Because, see, for me, like, again, for me, what was spoken in my household as I was growing up was always the lack. And I've even had conversations with, like, my sisters or my one particular sister about how it always felt like we had this like imbalance, I guess, because there was always lack. There's always lack being spoken. So now I've taken the initiative to say I will not speak lack out of there. Will be no lack coming out of my mouth.
Yep.
Because I can't do that because I saw it growing up and
Yeah.
it just made me feel a little bit leery about what's going to happen and oh my gosh, next month in a year, can we
just
pay
paycheck
this,
to
can we pay
paycheck.
that?
Yeah.
And you know what? My parents are always fighting over that. And I just made it a point to myself to say, I will not fight over that. I don't.
Yeah.
I rebuke that. I don't want to fight over
Yep.
things like that. So, that's kind of like my take on what I've seen.
No, yeah, and it does. It all correlates together. And I know that even if you are a woman whose parents are divorced, maybe they're not divorced. Maybe
Right.
you have resentments towards your father. You think it's this, that, or the other. But maybe if you stop and really pay attention to what you truly feel the dynamic is between you and your father, let's just say, could it be that you are carrying some of what your mom was carrying,
Right.
of her experience of being his wife, because being his wife is a totally different level of resentments than being his daughter. And I know that even I've tried to really look at that and be sort of introspective about, are these really my feelings, like is this thing like really mine, or am I adopting and carrying on some of her stuff? and to be able to separate that thing. And so I think, again, it's part of the learned behavior, even though, you know, I'm a middle-aged woman, like there's still these things that I'm even still trying to go and like a box of treasures and go, oh no, that's not mine, that's hers, that's his, that's you know what I mean?
That's not part of me. But also there's a couple things, so I'm gonna make 2 points. There is the people that will ask you, are your parents still married? That's a big question. And if you say yes they are, then they're kind of making a decision, or they're kind of, you know,
like on a date or something.
They're plotting out like the kind of person that you are if your parents are divorced. Now, if you are a male and you saw your father cheat on your mom all the time, the likelihood of you picking up those negative traits is very likely, unless you choose to be what we just said, the opposite of what you learned, meaning I will not be like my father. My father literally had no respect for my mother, and I will be damned if I do that. Now, if you're not that guy, then you'll say, well, my dad did it the entire time he was with my mother. And even if they divorce over it, you will still do it because you haven't unlearned that behavior.
Yeah. Yeah,
Period.
you have to be. I think the question in that scenario would be, are you a person who learns from other people's mistakes, or are you a person that has to really make your own mistakes to learn?
Right.
Because there is a huge difference.
Absolutely. There's a big difference. And they say that smart people learn from their mistakes, geniuses learn from other people's mistakes.
Yeah.
And I've heard that, and it's like, and so every time I'm about to do something, I'm like, should I be a genius and think about the things that other people have done and maybe not do them, or do I learn from my mistakes? And if you can learn from your mistakes, then you're pretty wise.
Yeah.
But you're a genius if you see what broke people to say, you know what? If I've made a decision to spend the rest of my life with this woman, I'm not going to do what my dad did.
Yeah.
Or I'm not going to do what my mother did if your mother was, you know, trifling. Because women do trifle too.
Yeah, women do some
do
wild
it
stuff.
too, yeah. So yeah. Or maybe your mom was like a shopaholic and loved to spend money and like got your whole family in debt because of it. Now you have to be a little bit more conscientious of, you know, your finances or your dad or whatever, you know. But these are the things that are learned toxic behaviors.
Yeah, I think that, you know, for, like I said, for myself, you know, being a middle-aged woman, I'm always kind of asking myself now when I have thoughts or feelings that seem a little bit negative or emotional, I really unpack them and I really ask myself, what was the root of this?
Yes.
Like I want the fog to clear and then just get right to the root of it so I can go, oh yeah, no, this is, I rebuke it, or this is not mine, this is this. And if you can just get really good at doing those things, you're going to see things so clearly, but you'll also see other people's kind of inability to do that yet.
Yes.
But when you're talking about the impression that our parents made on us, I love that you mentioned the lack thing, because we grew up in a time where everything's like, I bet now that happened, I bet you now this is going to happen.
When it rains, it pours.
Yeah, and like all of these things. And it's like, no, once you learn how to be abundant and be positive, there's so much power in seeing the good in people and seeing the gratitude moments in your life.
Yeah.
So if you have a husband and he's coming home and he has a little bit of alcohol in his breath, short of like if he told you, hey, I'm going to go with my buddies after work and have a beer, you know, I don't know. I think you just got to choose your battles. Only you know your situation. You always
have to. And every situation's unique to whatever it is that you're going through.
Yeah.
But you have to see how it's hindering you, or if it's hindering your relationship. If he's coming home, you know, every night he's drunk and he's being abusive and he's yelling at you and he's doing those types of things, I think at that moment you have to make that kind of decision to say, okay, well, this is becoming an issue.
Yeah.
Not so much how you're going to react and be like in his face trying to hit him. Like maybe you saw that growing up and your parents are getting into altercations and you're like, well, this is the way my mom handled it. And sometimes, you know, being Latinos or Latinas, sometimes the parents want to get the kids involved to be like, right, you know, little Susie, didn't he say this and that or the other? And rather than you know, privately going into a room when both of you guys are sober and level-headed, some of the parents, it's like, they want to bring all the kids into the mix to say, you know, let your dad know what a piece of garbage he is. And all that happens is this domino effect of negativity. And so guess what? Your kids are going to learn that negative behavior, and it's going to be a continuous negative chain of events.
You are so right. And it actually reminded me, there is something that people do that stands out to me sometimes that I'm like, And I
When
think
is
that
it?
in the beginning, when I first got married, I also did this.
Yeah.
So you know that whole thing, I don't know if anybody else has had this, where it's like when I first got married, if I vacuumed, like if I
Okay.
cleaned and I vacuumed and you see the lines of where I vacuumed, and you get home from work and you just step on those lines and there's
You're
not like a
like,
fanfare of like,
"What
honey,
beautiful
wow,
you could be an
vacuumed
alien because you did
oh
such a
my
good
god,
job."
I would feel some kind of way. I'd be like, oh, he doesn't even
He
care.
doesn't even
Blah
acknowledge
blah blah
the
blah blah.
line.
Da, 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 da. There's that, which I don't even care anymore now. It's like
Yeah.
whatever. That's number one, and then number two, I witness people doing things out of supposed act of kindness, like genuinely, like, oh, I helped this person, or this person was sick and I helped them get better, or oh, I'm gonna make this big meal because your family's coming over, and doing all these wonderful things out of supposedly the kindness of their heart. But when they don't get the fanfare, or they don't, it's like there's there's an invisible string attached,
To it
and there's an
all.
expectation of how the other person's supposed to react attached, that then ruins it all for you.
Right.
And it almost becomes this whole drama, and the guy's sitting there like, well, I never asked you to do these things.
Right.
And then you're
that's
like,
always
yeah,
the
but I
thing.
did do them.
Yeah.
And then
you have to say thank you. You don't say thank
no,
you. You're not
it's
grateful.
BS.
Yeah.
Like, that toxicity is something within you, and you need to figure that out.
Check that and see if that's something that is a learned behavior from your
Yes.
family, from your mom.
Yes.
Maybe you even saw it from a friend or a cousin or an aunt, someone that was like that impacted your life. And I think that you have to really just make the decisions that really help out your marriage, and not think, well, this is the way I saw my mom acted when we were
Yes.
growing up. No, you have to change those things.
You got to
and say,
start making little adjustments. Not huge
yeah.
things, but
No.
just being aware, just being self-aware will make you go, oh, that's that thing they were
That's a
talking
thing,
about.
yes.
Another one too, that I hear this mostly from guys that are very generous with their wives, is that they'll buy their wife like a beautiful watch or something that's very
kind of high end, yeah.
that he went out of his way, like, for no reason. It's not like a birthday necessarily.
Yeah.
And the woman will not act excited. It'll be like, oh, thank you, babe, and like just be like very kind of mute, like very like, oh, that's nice.
As
like,
you should buy
like
that
not.
from me.
And by the way, they are excited probably, but they don't want to like be all giddy in front of them.
Yeah.
They might tell their friends, oh my God, look what he got me. But to him, they're like, oh wow, like, what made you do this? Like, oh, that's
Yeah.
different, or whatever. And instead of letting him relish in that reward of like, I made her so freaking excited and happy, like a child, like, because I think they want to see that in us, and then we're like, no.
See, so I think that if your significant other has thought of you, no matter where he was and no matter what the detail is, you need to be very gracious to say, wow, I really appreciate you thinking about me, and really act excited, and not just be like, oh, this is the second white purse you get me. Like, I told you I needed a black one, not a white one.
Yeah.
And I've seen that before, by the way. I have.
Yes.
And I think it's because you become accustomed to the way that your significant other treats you. If he's really kind to you, rather than being gracious, you're being a jerk to say, like, I told you I needed a black one.
Well,
and then grab it and put it in the closet and never wear it again. It's so rude.
It's the focusing on the lack. It's the focusing on what you didn't get versus what you got. And so it's like, okay, you got like we see it with teenagers where we live here. And it's like the kid will get a G-Wagon for their 16th birthday, and the kid's like, but I wanted a blue one.
Yeah, I wanted you to wrap it blue. Why did you get me a white one? It's like, are you serious?
And by the way, that happens even on the smallest little level. And it could happen with you as a woman, that you make this, dish for your husband that you saw on TikTok or I don't know where. And then he's like,
what is this?
But I don't like scallions or whatever it is.
Scallops or onions.
Or whatever it is.
I can never make you happy.
And then here we go. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so you got to just look at those little triggers and yourself, and then also ask yourself, is the feeling that you have inside of you, whether it's love, whether it's excitement, whether it's whatever, is it making it out of you and over to the person?
Right.
I've told you, I'm guilty of that. I have such gratitude. I live in a constant state of gratitude, but it doesn't always make it out of myself and over to like maybe a person that I'm so grateful for. And I'm
that's
working
okay,
on
but
it.
you're working on it, and that's the thing. I think when you're able to kind of pinpoint what the issue is and how you need to kind of better it, then that's okay. Like I can say to you that growing up, I didn't grow up with that state of gratitude, but anytime anyone does anything for me, it's like thank you for thinking about me, or thank you for that. I appreciate you doing that, because no one needs to do anything for you, by the way. And so I always say that. But when they do, you have to acknowledge that too, to say, you know what, thank you for that. I really appreciate you, and or maybe get them a little something to say thank you. But you know what, if you are stuck in that whole toxic behavior of what you learned, I mean, sometimes, these self-help books, they really do help.
They can,
They really, really help me. And I know that, like, even for my sister, because we grew up in the same environment, and it was always very, like, it was very tumultuous, and I love my parents, they're still together, but it was a very tumultuous time for us. And we've had to do a lot of work, a lot of reading, a lot of self-help. And there's nothing wrong with that, because I think it's good to kind of always be learning and educating yourself.
We're all a work in progress.
We're all trying to figure it out.
We're all
like, why did I get dropped off on planet Earth?
It's literally two
Why am I here?
There's literally two classes of people: the ones that are willing to do the work and the ones that just aren't. And you have to be willing to do the work on yourself. But before you go blaming him or being mad at him because you vacuumed it so pretty and he didn't acknowledge it, you got to ask yourself, why do you need that acknowledge? Like, why do you need that?
As long as you admire what you did and you like it, you're like, hey,
you want to do
if
it.
Someone sees it, great, and if they don't, I admire it. That's okay. But
exactly.
It's learned behavior. It's toxic
sure
learned behavior sometimes, but it's okay. So all we can say is, to this episode, we're gonna cheers and
remind you that you deserve fresh lettuce. See you next week.
Cheers.
Cheers.